have different colors in line types. Mine are all red continuous, just for the sake of making them stand out when I talk about them. Okay, so those colors are wrong. They're not all red, they're not all continuous. You got to go by the list on the assignment. So for presentation's sake, what I would do is I would go to the layout tab, at the bottom left. Okay? This is already there. So if you used my template to create this DWG, this should already be there. To create a viewport, there's more than one way to do that. I usually type in mview at the command line, mview or make view. That's one way. Or you can go to the pull down menu, view, viewports, and then create a viewport. We're only going to create one right now. And it just needs to be a simple rectangular thing. So it's up to you how you want to do it. I think you can even do it from here. View, new view. And that's from the ribbon. So there's many ways of doing it. Again, I'm old school. I learned all this using typing at the command line with the pull down menus. The ribbon is new for me. I use it, but sparingly. So mview. To do this, I usually put it on a layer called viewport. And if it's not there, I would create it. So I usually create a layer called viewport. And that viewport layer, I don't want to see the frame. So I'm going to make it non-print. That's how you can see it in the drawing, but it won't show up on paper or a PDF, right? So when you print this layer, whatever's on it won't show. Okay, so I'm going to make it current, and it will not print. So now it should be current. Yeah, ready to go. So now I type in mview, and I cut a hole in paper space to look at model space. I'm going to use the whole field, so I'm going to go from endpoint to endpoint here. And when you do that, it's going to show you model space through the viewport, and it'll zoom extents, so the scale is going to be off. Okay, so we need to establish scale and do a little bit of housekeeping tools. So that should be review for everybody, creating a viewport. Again, I'll move the frame over. Right, let me do this, and I'll get back to it. That frame now, because it's in a non-plot layer, if I go to print this, I'm just going to type in the word plot in the command line, or you can go to the little printer icon at the top left, plot. More than one way to do everything. If you don't have to change anything, it's all ready to go. If you say preview, you'll notice the frame does not show. It's on a no plot layer. Okay, and that's how I like to manage it. I don't want to see the window. I just want to see the item, so that you can't tell you're actually cut a hole in the paper. So I'm going to put this back. And now the scale. A couple of ways of establishing scale. Okay, the first thing you want to do is what's an appropriate scale for this size object? Okay? Well, the paper scale is always going to be 1:1. We're always going to plot at 1 millimeter equals 1 unit, which on paper is 1 to 1,000. Okay? However, we can manage the size of the object. We can change the zoom factor and change the scale of the drawing without having to change the plotting scale. Okay? So what happens is, if anybody opens this drawing, they just plot it. It's always 1:1. But whoever set up the drawing, they can change the zoom factor and have different scales on the drawing. Okay? In this case here, we will use a 1 to 1,000 scale. So there's a couple of ways of doing that. You can click on the frame, and when you do that, watch down here at the bottom right. You get this button down here. And when you open that up, you'll see all these preset scales. Okay? So if you want 1 to 1,000, you choose that. If you want 1 to 100, you choose that. If you want 1 to 5, you choose that. And it'll change the zoom factor. Okay? Now, it doesn't look like it's working. 1 to 1,000 looks to be a bit off, so let's try 2,000. Okay, so 2,000 works. So you can play with the scale. Okay, so that's one way of doing it, actually using something right out of the box. Okay, so we're still going to print. We're still going to plot at 1:1, which is 1 to 1,000 on paper. But the zoom factor is half size. So if I list the frame, you'll see it's actually half of paper space is half of model space. Okay? And remember, 1/1000 is actually bigger than 1/2000. Right? So 1/2000 or 1 to 2,000 is actually half the size of 1 to 1,000. Okay, I don't know how much you learned about scale when you were in your CAD classes, but let me do a quick review because it's worth repeating. Let me share with you you see me now? I think in the bottom, in the corner there, or somewhere. Let me share with you. This. I'm going to try document camera. This one. Allow. So you can see me right. Okay. So here's my whiteboard. Everybody can see me. I'm just going to give you a quick lesson on scale. It's important. So in AutoCAD, AutoCAD was invented and originally used by a lot of architects. So when they wanted to plot on paper 1 to 1,000 on paper, that's the plotting scale that they were taking, because they draw everything in millimeters. Okay? So on screen, 1 AutoCAD unit equals 1 millimeter if you're an architect. Okay? Well, we're not architects. We're using 1 AutoCAD unit is equal to 1 meter. There's a factor of 1,000 at play. So if I want something to plot on paper at 1 to 1,000, I have to divide the 1,000 by 1,000, right? So my plotting scale is 1 to 1. And then on paper, that translates into 1 to 1,000. 1 to 1,000. Okay? The general rule is whatever scale you want, you have to divide by 1,000 if you're drawing in meters, which we will be. Everything we draw is in meters, not millimeters. Okay? But if you were an architect, we wouldn't be having this discussion. But because we're civil practitioners, we're doing something else. Okay? So now, if I want to plot on paper 1 to 2,000, that's my paper scale. I have to use metric 1 to 2. 1 to 1,000 is 1 to 1. Basically, divide this number by 1,000. If I want 1 to 500 on paper, which we will later in the course, I'm going to plot at 1 to 0.5. Okay? Now, that's if you were manipulating the scale for the plot feature. We're not going to do that. What we're going to do is, instead of plotting at these different numbers, we're always going to plot at 1 to 1. And then we'll change the zoom factor on that window I drew, right? So if I want to go from 1,000 to 2,000, I'm going to make my view half of model space, 0.5 paper space. If I want 1 to 500, I'm going to use a factor of 2 times XP, or paper space. Okay, so I'm going to change my zoom factor and always plot at 1 to 1. So on paper, we plot at 1 to 1, and then we change the zoom factor. If I want 2,000, I change this scale of the zoom factor to half. If I want 1 to 500, I make it twice as big. Twice as big, 1 to 500 is twice as big as 1,000, and 1 to 2,000 is half the size of 1 to 1,000. And it sounds funny, 2,000 is bigger than 1,000, but remember it's 1 over 1,000. And if I multiply this by a half, I get 1 over 2,000. So don't be confused by the number, right? 1 to 2,000 is actually smaller than 1 to 1,000. And then 1 to 500, 1,000, if I multiply by 2, will give me 2 over 1,000 is equal to 1 over 500. 1 to 500 is twice as big as 1 to 1,000. It's kind of upside down. It takes a while to get used to that, but that's the way it's drawn. Okay? So we're going to manipulate the zoom factor, not the plotting scale. We will always plot at 1 to 1. The good news is you don't have to do anything. Just open your drawing and print it. You don't have to change any of the settings. All you have to manage is the zoom factor by choosing the appropriate scale that you want on that list that I showed you. And I'll show it to you again. Okay, we'll get right back to that. So a little lesson on scale if you haven't discussed that in another course, or if you haven't discussed it in this detail. So let me go back to AutoCAD and I'll show you that again. So I'm going to stop sharing this. Let me get rid of my video feed again. Hope that helps. And let's go back to AutoCAD. So share application. Okay. So here's AutoCAD back again. So here we are. AutoCAD. And again, if you want to establish scale, and again, it always gives you, when you create this, it always zooms extents. Okay, so if I go into here and I okay, so if you look at that, right, when you first create it, it's got a weird scale. It wants to be 0.5. It has to be exactly 0.5, which is half of 1,000, 2,000. So I'm going to choose 2,000. Okay, so that's a true scale of 2,000. Now, if you notice the icon here, this is paper space. If I click it here, I'll go into model space through paper space. And notice the icon, right? These are just X, Y axes. And if I double click out here, you'll see it looks like a triangle. And And that's how you know whether you're in paper space or model space, especially if you're zoomed in. And if you're zoomed in, you double click here, oh, it's paper space. How do I get back out? Well, you can't zoom out. Now you're stuck in the window. So this happens to some students. Instead of double clicking outside the frame, which is not in the field of view right now, you can type in PS for paper space. And then that other icon comes out, and now you can zoom out of the frame. But now you screwed up your scale. So you gotta fix this again. And what I do is, I grab this and I change this to 2000 again. Oh, but then it's not centered. So then you got a couple of options. You can double click in here. If you pan, it preserves the scale, as long as you don't zoom in and out. Okay. And then you double click. Now to prevent that from happening, and notice when the object gets smaller in paper space, when the object gets smaller, if I regenerate, the items would get bigger. If I zoom in, the object gets bigger, I regen, everything has to get smaller. So it's always trying to compensate. It's always trying to keep a constant text height. It's annotated. Okay? The text height will always be, you zoom in on here, and you measure in paper space, it should be about 2 millimeters high. Oh, okay, in this case, 1.5 millimeters high. Right? And if you, again, disturb that, it just got smaller. If I regen, the numbers will get bigger. And what size? Back in paper space, the same size it's always been. Again, the height of this is always going to be 1.5. So if you make it twice as big, the text gets half size. If you make it a quarter of the size, it gets 4 times bigger. It's always counteracting the zoom factor. The smaller the zoom, the bigger the text. And then the opposite's true. Okay, so it's always counteracting that. So again, let's look at this, change the scale. So if you don't want to fool around with this, right? Once you get the scale and you center the object so you can see everything, once you're happy with that, if you come back to paper space, you can click on the view frame and lock this. So now that you have 2000 and you're happy with that, 2 icons over is this lock. Click it, and now it's forever locked. You cannot zoom inside and out without screwing up the scale. So now if I go into paper space, if I zoom in and out using the middle button, the wheel on my mouse, if I zoom in and out, it zooms paper space, not model space. If I unlock this and I zoom in and out, it screws up the view scale. Right? So once you have that locked, let me set it back to 2000. And let me pan over and center it. And now I'm going to lock it. Now that it's locked, even though I'm in model space, it will zoom paper space. So once you're happy with the scale and the position of the object, leave it alone. Okay? Lock it. And then there won't be any danger of you accidentally changing the scale factor. Okay? And I'll be checking for that. Make sure your scale factor is correct. So that's how you create the viewport. That's how you get your scale. So for this particular drawing, you're going to use a zoom factor of 0.5 to establish a 2000. So you're going to print this at 1000, but everything in that viewport is half the size. The scale will be actually represent 2000. Okay? So now if we go to plot, and do a preview, you're all ready to go. Okay? And then it'll ask you where you want to save it. Just give it a name, topo1, 543 topo. The nice thing about submitting through Blackboard is you're all going to use the same file name, 543 topo. And then when you submit it and I download it, it automatically adds your student ID, everything before at myseneca.com, your email address. So your student ID will go there, the date and time, and so on. Okay, so it'll index it for me. So you can all use the same file name, but when I download it, it'll give unique identifiers to each file, so I know whose is whose. The other thing you want to change now is in the title block here, give the drawing a name. This would be existing topography. Or existing ground, whatever you want to call it. Give it a project type name. Okay, don't call it assignment 1 or module 1. Okay, give it a project. Okay, let's try and mimic the workplace. So this drawing is existing topography. So that's what you do there. Okay. In here, put your name. Type your name, and you should put in. We always type in capital letters. All text is in capital letters. Always. Okay. That's drawn by you. Designed by nobody. You didn't design anything. You're just creating a model of existing stuff, right? You're just transforming it into something else. So for this particular assignment, you're not designing anything. So there's no design by. You could either delete it or you could put in don't put your name in. There's nothing designed on this. It's just a process. The next thing you want to do is the date, year, month, day, including the slashes. And then the scale. You want to change the scale. This is wrong. It's not 1 to 500. First of all, there's no vertical. There's no profiles or cross section, so you don't need that. This is 1 to 2000. So make sure you change that. And then, remember the scale factor. Yeah, somebody has a question. Just a second. What's the difference between horizontal and vertical scale? So if you're looking at the plan view, that's got 1 scale. If you look at it in profile, right, in cross-section or profile, you might exaggerate the vertical. So we'll look at profiles later. Do you remember when in a CRX, when you drew the plan view of the road and then the profile, all the pipes underground? The profile might have an exaggerated scale. Did you do that in CRX, Sumitra? Remember when you drew the road, you drew the plan view and then the underground stuff? Yeah, well that was vertically exaggerated 5 or 10 times. If I remember right, you created a block and then changed the Y scale to 5 or 10 times. Okay, so there is no vertical scale in this one. There will be later when we do the road profile. So that's 2000. And then here you want to change the text on these 2 items. Okay, the distance from here all the way to here in paper space is 20 meters. What does this distance from here to here represent in this space? Remember, the scale is not exactly, it's not 1 to 1, it's half size. So you need to decide, is the distance from here to here, it can't be 20, it's got to be either half the distance or twice the distance. Everybody understand? Right? This is in paper space. But the distances in model space have a scale factor, right? Half size. So the distance from here to here in paper space is not what the distance you see here in model space. So you need to determine in paper space, what does this distance from here to here represent in the viewport? Okay. And I'll give you a hint. It's either half the distance that you measure in paper space or twice the distance, right? There's a factor of 2 at play, either a half or 2. Right? 1 over 2 or 2. You need to figure that out. I'm going to leave that up to you. So what should those distances be? Okay. The distance from here to here in paper space is 20. The distance from here to here in the viewport is not going to be 20. It's either going to be half of 20 or 2 times 20. Okay. I'll leave it up to you. That's all I'm going to say. That's part of the assignment, right? Part of the scale discussion we just did. Okay, the next thing is the drawing number. How many drawings do we have? We have 1 so far, so this is drawing number 1. And the digital file name. This should say 543, topo 543.dw. What we're talking about, right? That's the digital file name. Okay, so it's the first drawing on paper, and this is the digital file name I need to find. If somebody hands me this piece of paper, I know which drawing it came from. Okay, so that should be the same for everybody. Okay, so that's all you need to fill it in the titles block, nothing else, okay? Key plan, don't worry about. Okay? If I didn't talk about it, don't waste your time, okay? So just do what I suggested in here, and that's all you need. Establish the scale, add the north arrow. I'm not going to show that, I'll leave that up to you. Where, put the north arrow on the drawing. It's 543 topo, sorry. Yeah, 543 topo, whatever you name the file. Yeah, 543 topo, that's what it says here. And then plot it. And all you have to do is say, okay, it's ready to go, and save it somewhere. I'll put it on my desktop under the course code with all my drawings. And there's the PDF. Okay. Now it looks kind of light, but if you zoom in on it, all the color is there. It's all going to be fine. And I'll be able to mark the PDF. Right? I can just check to see that the appropriate layers are frozen or thawed, that you've got the right contour interval. And then I'll go into your digital file, I'll check the scale, I'll look at your title block information, make sure everything's there that should be, and so on. So the submission on Friday is to submit your DWG, 543 topo DWG, and your PDF, both. To do that, so you have a 543 PDF and a 543 DWG. Okay, to submit this, you should go to here. And announcements page for this course? Can you all see my announcements page? Yes, okay. So if you go to the course, if you go to the course page and you go to assignments, you click right on the word assignment and you submit it, okay? Now there is a document here for how to submit to Blackboard. I'll let you read it, it's very quick. The one thing I want to stress is this: when I go to assignment, and I go to browse my computer, remember there's two drawings, there are two files. So I'm going to go to my desktop, I'm going to go to my course, I'm going to go here. So I want to submit both my DWG and my Topo, okay? I don't think you can pick both. Oh, you can. You can pick both at once and say open, and now both files are there, okay? Do not hit submit unless you see both files here. And you can submit this as many times as you like before Friday. Okay? So if you submit it and then think, oh, I made a mistake, I want to change something, just submit it again. When you submit it for a second time, always, always, always include both files. If you only changed one and you send me that, I'm only going to mark the last thing you submitted. So if one of the drawings is missing, I won't be able to mark it. Okay? You're going to get 0 on that part of it. Okay? So when you're submitting, always submit both. And if you're submitting again, always submit both. Do not hit the submit button until both files are showing here. Okay? And in a previous version of Blackboard, you couldn't choose more than one. You had to browse, pick one, browse, pick the other one, and then submit. This is good. You can actually pick both at the same time. So when you go to browse my computer, if you store your DWG and your PDF in the same directory, you can just click on one, shift, click the other, and off you go. So we don't have to include, no. Because you're submitting it online, what happens is when I download them, it'll automatically add your credentials to each file. So it'll add a prefix with your student ID, the date, the time, and so on. Okay, so so it's easier for me to teach you and say everybody do the same thing, and then Blackboard takes care of the rest. Okay, so the digital submission is good. If you are emailing it, which I do not want, do not email. If you email me your assignment, I'm not going to look at it. Please put it through Blackboard. Okay, and that's what I expect you to see. And then you can hit the submit button and it'll go. All right, so you have till Friday at midnight to submit this. What I'd like to do now is it's 11:30. We're together for another hour, so I'm going to stop teaching. That's all you need to know to do this assignment. I'm going to field some questions. There's 35 people in the room. I enabled your voice. You can speak if you unmute yourself, if you want to ask me a question, and I'll try and answer. I did already exchange some emails with people. It's very difficult to help you with AutoCAD through email. Like the time lag is a pain. You might have asked me last night, and then when I get active, I might suggest something and you won't get it till hours later. It's kind of a pain that way. PDF 5, sure. So now is the time to ask. Okay, so you want to see PDF 5 again. Okay, do this. Bring up AutoCAD. So PDF 5. Which one was PDF 5? Yeah, when you're going to get some errors when you create the break lines, or when you define the break lines for the surface, you can just ignore it. It's telling you that there's some lines that cross each other. Don't worry about it because you're using the proximity function. Okay, so the errors when you do that don't matter. They're not going to cause a problem. But let me show you. I think I can duplicate that. If I go to my surfaces and I delete the boundary, if I delete these break lines, or I can define them again maybe. Let me just do that. I'm just going to turn off the services. So all the break lines, all the polylines are there, and I'm going to add them. And then I'm going to use proximity. So when you do this, you get a whole bunch of errors. Just ignore them. Okay? So I've had a few emails related to that. It's not a problem. It's just reminding you that, hey, this polyline and this polyline are crossing. Okay? That's the warning you're getting at a few spots. So you can ignore that. So when you're creating your break lines, those errors don't mean anything. Okay, that should answer a lot of questions for a lot of you. Okay, so I hope I don't get any more emails about that. I created the surface, but it doesn't appear. Can I delete it? No. So when you create the surface, the 0 layer must be on, right? And typically by default it puts the surface on the layer called on 0, and I suggested last day that you change it. Put it on the layer called C10. Okay, by default, when you create an object in Civil 3D, it's going to want to put it on 0 layer as default, even if it's not the current layer. Put it on the layer called C10. That's the first thing. If you don't see the surface, there's a couple of issues that you might run into. First of all, the surface style. So if the surface style is set to no display, obviously you're not going to see it. If the layer it's on is frozen and off, you're not going to see it. The other issue is if the surface has no data. This is probably your problem. So if this is on, and you don't see it, here's a couple of issues that might come up. I was about to read it. No, don't throw anything up. What I do is this. If you defined the groups, which in your case should be all the G' groups, right? I didn't do that, but you should have your groups here. If that group has nothing in it, then it won't build anything. And here's the trick. Here's what you want to check. If you say to the surface, use the group to build the surface, and there's no points in the group, you're not going to get a surface. So the way to check it is this. If you go to the point groups and expand that, you should see these black dots here. Okay, all points will always have the black dots. If you misspell something here, let me go and show you. In the include tab, suppose you misspell this. Instead of a T, you put an L. Okay, I misspell it. See that black dot disappears? This group is now empty. There are no points. If I look at the next group, there are points in that database. Right? You can see the points. If you have no black dots next to the G' group names, then they're empty. And if they're empty, you're not going to see them. I can't expand it. You're not expanding the point group, you're expanding the heading point groups. And then all your point groups are here. And then you can go in and check the properties. So that's one issue some students run into. If you type this wrong, or you don't do it at all, it should be a T. Oops, uppercase T. When I say apply, watch what happens to the left there. A little black dot will appear. Okay? And that means that there are points in that group. If all of your groups are empty, then there are no points for the surface to build. My point groups are still making my points disappear. All my groups have black dots too. So you don't see a surface, Michael? Caitlin, you're using the wrong format. You're using the wrong format, Caitlin. They actually come in somewhere else, right? So make sure you use PNEZD. You're probably using PENZD. You flipped the format, right? It's point number, northing, easting elevation, not easting, northing elevation. If you flip that, if you use the wrong format, the points will come in somewhere else. Okay, Caitlin, so try it again. In your case, you're going to have to delete all your points and import again. I have made all of the dots black except for your pick. Okay, so check the spelling. Is there any other possibilities? The only thing I can think is the spelling, or the EOP points are not in your drawing for some reason. So if you go to your list, why don't you try this, Shalom? If you go to all points and you sort them by, you can go to edit just to get the list come up. If you sort them all by raw description, you should see, these are all in alphabetical order now, you should see EOP layers. Okay, so you're going to have to kind of scroll through this and see if you see. If they're in the drawing, then they should be in the group. If the points are not in the drawing, then you're going to have a problem. Okay, hang on. Okay, try that. Okay. So for the steps, what other layers that need to be off before plotting? All the P' layers except for the service stuff. So I want to see sanitary maintenance holes, storm maintenance holes, hydrants. Those should all be showing, and the trees. The trees should be on. It worked. Okay, good. Yeah, it's important that you use the proper format. And remember, in this course, we're only going to use the NE, not the EN. Right? There's only one format. The P layers are all on. Yes, that's correct. check if your final drawing is done correctly. No. You have to follow all the instructions and then I'll let you know, okay? A lot of people do this. I am not going to mark your assignment ahead of time, okay? If you have a specific question about a certain issue you're having, then I'll be glad to answer those questions. But I'm not going to accept your drawing, tell you everything that's wrong with it, and then have you submit it again, okay? That's not how this is going to work, okay? So I'm giving you the information you need to do everything that's being asked of you, and then I'll mark it, okay? All right, so please, I had one student do that. Can you check my drawing, make sure everything's okay? I'll do that on Friday after midnight. Okay, that's how this works. It's an academic course that you're taking. I hope you can do all the tasks that I've defined, and some of this is review, and then we'll see how it goes. They're all equally weighted, so 100 divided by 6, 16.67%. Should we connect the minor water course line from the lower right side to the, no, there's the double line, kind of that Y shape, and then there's that single line that kind of goes from the middle to the bottom right. They're two separate things. Only my G tree that has black dot. What should I do? Check the spelling of all the include tabs. Okay, so you can go into here, go into one of them properties, go to the include tab and check this spelling. And be careful, if there's a space in there, even though you can't see it, if there's a character code, like if I put a space in here, at the end, if I put a space, it's going to look for that. If it's not there, watch, that black dot should disappear for the height. Yeah, there's no space in the string. You have to explode the file that you insert, but you do not explode the break lines. In order for a break line to be defined, it must be a polyline. Okay, so check your spelling. That's the only thing I can think. Unless those points are not in the drawing, for whatever reason, I wouldn't see why they are. Is the asterisk sign and the raw description important? It's not that critical in this drawing, but it's good practice, because later at work you might have descriptions that are indexed. You might have like tree 1, tree 2, tree 3, tree 4, and you want them all on one layer or all in one group. So the asterisk is what's called a wild card. So it only looks for T-tree, and then if there's a 1, a 2, a 3, a 10, or a whatever after it, it'll include all of them, right? So it's good practice to kind of use these wild cards. They're not necessary, but it's just good habit. That's what I do. Is there any way to see the points? Is there any way to see the points of the water course again? After I created polylines for it and unfroze the layer, I couldn't see the points anymore. Okay, so I've had this question before. There's a command called regen. This is just the video card. Regen. Okay? And try that command. Watch this. I'm going to turn off my layers. I'm going to get rid of the surface so it's not there. So no display. Remember I froze all my P' layers except for a few? I'm going to thaw them. Watch. I'm going to go to P. I'm going to take all my P layer points. I'm going to thaw them, right? So now they should all be visible. When I go back to my drawing, if you don't see them, if they don't appear, type in regen. And that's just the video card playing tricks on you. Okay? So sometimes they're off, and it's just one way of getting the view back. How do we isolate all the T' layers, for example? Well, you can do it through the layer control. So I could go into layer control, select all, turn everything off. And then you can go to your T' layers and turn just them on. Okay? But when you're selecting them as polylines, you don't want to see sand, none of the sand layers. So I'm going to turn those off. I don't want to see any of the storm layers. I'm going to turn those off. And I don't want to see any of the water main layers. I'll turn that off. Everything else should be a break line. And so these are the break lines. That's one way. Another way, it's a little more tedious, is if you use this button here, isolate layer, but then you have to pick one thing on each one. So there's the embankment layer, shoulder, edge of pavement, center line, edge of pavement, center line, and then if you have a water course layer that you drew, it's there. So then you could do it that way as well. But I find if you go to the layer control, it's faster just to pick the layers that you want. Turn everything off and then turn on only what you want to see. There's way to do anything. Okay? So it's just a matter of what makes the most sense for the task at hand. Michael, sorry, only my tree, sanitary, and notes are showing. All the spelling is good. I have regen as well. Okay. Is layer 0 on or thawed? Make sure layer 0 is on or thawed. Try that, Michael. All your layers are on and thawed. Okay. Check your description keys. Is the spelling correct in the description keys? This shouldn't matter. So your description keys, if you go back to settings, under points, under description keys, under import point descriptions, if you go to edit the keys, you look at this list. Make sure your spelling is correct in here as well. For ground, I wrote ground elevation. In where? In your group? You wrote ground elevation in the include tab. Is that what you're saying, Michael? Oh yeah, the general description doesn't matter. It's what's in the tab for include, right? So the thing that does the job is this. If you go back to Prospector and you go to your group properties, you gain membership into the group by what you type here. So if this is typed wrong, it won't be in that group. And you have to look at all 10 occurrences. All of my include descriptions are typed correct. Okay, so the issue is you can't see the points. Okay, I'll get to the rest of you. Hang on. Hello?
Hello, Professor?
Okay. Yeah, Claire, just a second.
Okay.
Just a second. Okay, Michael, you might want to turn your microphone on and ask me. Okay, let me just deal with Claire now, and then I'll get back to your question. Sorry, go ahead, Claire.
For the point label style, under each label, we have the visibility. They have the three, like true, or false something, and
yes.
the component. I cannot. Because honestly, I have three. So could you redo it to show me where three I have to choose?
Watch the screen. I'll show you where to find it.
Okay.
So if you go to point labels, and you go to the stem, you make a copy, right? And then you change the name, right? And once you change the name, in the general tab, this is where you turn the visibility of the whole label off, right? Watch the preview. So if I change this to false, it turns everything off. That's no good. Okay, so make sure this is always true. Don't touch it. If you go to the layout tab and you want to turn off one or all of these, you have to scroll through this component name. So the number, if you turn that to false, it turns the number off. If you go to the elevation and you turn that to false, it turns the elevation off. And if you go to point description and you turn that to false, you'll see nothing. So this is where you make those three different visibility states. So it's in the layout tab.
Okay.
Does that help?
Oh yeah. Should we do the component? Oh, okay. I know you mean
under layout. You have to choose each one separately. Yeah.
Okay.
So you have settings for each one. This is where you access them.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So how do you insert your DXF? When I click insert, something else comes in. Yeah. Caitlin, the insert command has been changed in the latest version of AutoCAD. It used to be a different dialog box. So here's how it looks when I do it. If I type in IN for insert, this is the dialog box that comes up. Or sorry, I for insert. This is the dialog box I get. So to insert the external file, I have to use this little ellipsis button here. There's three dots. It's called ellipsis. You click on that, and then it gives you this, and you can go to your desktop, your course code, your downloads, your module 1. And if you don't see the file there because it's a DXF file, it's because this is set by default to drawing. So you have to make sure that you change this to default to DXF. You pick the file. When you say open, nothing happens. It just appears here now. Okay? And if you don't want to see it as an image, you can look at it as a as just a list. So it appears in this dialog box. It still hasn't gone into the drawing. Then you can set your parameters here. So make sure everything is on. You want the insertion point to be by default 0, 0, 0. You want the scale to be 1 across the board there, X, Y, and Z, and you want the rotation angle to be 0. Then to bring it into the drawing, you just double click on this. And I don't want to do it today. So double click on the file name here, once it appears here, and it should insert into the drawing. And it should fall right on top of where your points are. Does that answer your question, Caitlin? Michael, when defining the minimum and maximum elevation for the surface build, do we check the second? Yeah. So this is what I look at. I'm going to go back to Prospector. I'm going to go to all points, and you should do the same. Okay. And then in all points, if you pull up the edit points, you'll get a dialog box. You'll see all your points in the database. And sorry, that's the wrong thing. All points, edit points. And, sorry, point editor. So when you see all your points here, you sort the list by point elevation. So when you click here, the lowest numbers, you're going to see a bunch of zeros. So there is your lowest number. It's going to be different than mine. Okay? So anything less than in my case, 145.15. Okay? So anything less than that will do. So all numbers less than 100 will eliminate the zeros. And then if you sort it again, you'll see a bunch in a certain range, and then one of them will be way out. So then you pick a number just above this, let's say in my case 200. Anything above 200, ignore it, and then it'll get rid of the high spike. Okay, so you have to sort the point elevation column to see what number you should use. And there's more than one solution, right? You just want to get rid of the spikes. So I can use, in my case, anything less than 100, anything less than 10, anything less than 2 meters. As long as the zeros are under that number, you're good. Okay? Do we also apply new contour label style to user? No, the user one we're not using that. We're just using major and minor. Trump. Okay. So where is it here? Michael, you want to unmute and ask me a few more questions? Sorry, I have to get back to you after Clay. Michael, you have your microphone?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah, so none of my points are showing except the hydro and the sand MH. But it does work when I switch the description on the point group.
Sorry, it does work when?
So if I want my ground points to show up, if I go to property and switch the raw description matching to edge of payment, then they'll show up. But they won't show up when they're on the proper description.
Okay, so at the command, save the drawing.
Okay.
At the command line, type in audit, A-U-D-I-T, audit.
Okay.
Hit enter, and then you'll get asked the dumbest question you've ever seen. If we find any errors, do you want to fix them? The default is no. Change that to yes. Put in a Y and enter. And then let it do its thing. It's going to scan through the drawing and look for errors. Okay?
Okay.
And it'll do a couple of passes. And then it'll tell you total errors found and total errors fixed. Does yours give you any?
0.
0 found, 0 fixed?
Yeah.
Okay, so that wasn't the problem. Okay. That's one way. Sometimes there's some issues in your drawing. Okay. Now, just a word about this audit command. If you see 10 errors found and 10 errors fixed, then you're happy. Okay. I most of the time when I use this command, as long as whatever's found is fixed, I don't care what the errors are. Really, it's hard to figure out what those errors are. Okay, that's more of a software understanding thing, which I'm not an expert in. I'm not an expert in the software. I'm an expert in how to use it to do engineering work. Okay, so that's what my specialty lies. So when there's something wrong with the software, I really have a hard time fixing it. I'll call IT myself. But that's one thing I know you can try. So in your case, you're still getting an issue with your HTTP. How about this? If you go to point groups and you right click and you go to properties, and not an individual one, but the entire point groups list. If you go to right click and you go to properties, you'll see this dialog box. The order in which you see the items on the list is the order in which the point decides it's a member of, right? So all points should always be at the bottom, which means if this is my description, I belong to this. If this is my description, I belong to this. It goes through the list in order. There's a hierarchy. If I don't have a place in any of the ones you've created, then by default, I'm going to end up here. If I put this at the top of the list, then everything is a member of the all points group first. So whatever settings are set for that, then that's what you're going to see. So if I say okay now, all of my points that used to look like trees don't look like trees anymore. I'll show you. Right in here, there's a bunch of trees. Now they're part of the all points group. So that hierarchy is important. So under properties, and by default it's usually okay. If I put this to the bottom, that's the last resort, let's say. Put it to the bottom, and if I say okay, then it'll behave the way it's supposed to according to how it wants to be the member of tree before all points. So that hierarchy is important. I don't know if that's your issue, but that's something else to look at sometimes.
No, that's not my issue. I mean, I do have black dot inside all of my point groups as well.
Okay. Can I suggest one more thing? So the one that's called ground, the one that's giving you grief,
Yeah.
right click and delete. Right click and just delete it. Delete, not the points, just delete the group. Get rid of it and recreate it from scratch. Try that.
Okay, I'll try it and I'll let you know.
Okay. PDF number 5. Sorry, so much for this. We'll get back to that. So PDF number 5 was build the surface. Is that correct? I don't remember that. PDF number 5 should be build the surface. Yes, not update. If you see that exclamation mark on the surface, you use the rebuild kit. That should force it. Okay, let me create the surface from scratch again. I'm going to delete mine. Watch. I'm going to delete it, and I'm going to say yes, gone. Okay, so I just deleted my surface. So to create a surface, and again, step-by-step instructions are in the PDF. So to create a surface, first thing you need to do is right-click on surfaces, create surface. Give it a name. I'm going to call it existing. Existing. And I don't want no display. I want to see what's happening. So I'll turn this to standard. Okay, so I see the triangles at least. So there it is. It's an empty box. It hasn't done anything yet because I didn't get it to do. Okay, so if you expand the surface name and you expand the definitions, you'll see all the different things you can define for the surface. So the first order of business is point data. They always point data first. So under point groups, add. In this case, you're going to pick all your G' groups. Okay? You're going to have 10 of them. All right? So that's what you need to do. I didn't create them all, so don't do this. Do what I said. Don't do what I'm about to do. Choose your G', the groups, all the groups. Do not choose all points. That's the only one you don't select. Okay? But I have to do it because I didn't create all the groups yet. Okay? So it builds the surface. Once you've done building the surface with points, you want to add breaklines. For breaklines now, you want to isolate the layers that are the T' layers that you inserted from the DXF file. So the way I do that is this. I go in here, I turn everything off, except the T' layers. And of all the T' layers, I do not want to use anything related to surface. Right, so I'm going to turn off all the sand layers, all the storm layers, all the sand layers. Sand, 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 storm, storm, water main, water main, water main, water main. I'm going to turn those off. Everything else is going to be a break line, right? So edge of pavement, edge of shoulder, center line, embankment layers. So to define those break lines, you click on break lines, you right click, add, change this to proximity. I don't want any additional points with zero elevation. I just want the relationships that these represent. Say okay. Select everything, hit enter, and you're done. Okay? Now, if you didn't draw your water course lines, you'll have to do this again with the new polylines that you draw. If you draw them first, and then you can create your break line definition all at once. It doesn't matter. You can define some, and then draw more, and then define them as well. Okay? So make sure you do both. either draw them and then define them, or define these, draw some more, define those. Just because you put them in the drawing doesn't mean they're part of the surface. So when you draw those water course lines, you have to include them as break lines. And then finally, you're going to go with your boundary. So my boundary, I drafted it on a layer called boundary. Layer called boundary, which is this one. And this one here is my boundary. I'm going to turn everything else off. And I just want to pick my boundary layer. Okay, so there's my boundary. And then to define the boundary, you go to boundaries, right click, add. Just accept the defaults, pick it, and it should shrink wrap it. Then when I turn everything back on, just turn on all my layers. Regen if you don't see anything. And there's the surface, and it's got a nice clean edge. It doesn't have anything sticking out, right? And then for presentation, again, you're going to turn off all the P' layers, except the ones that represent the surfacing and the trees. So that and that. And this one I want to see. And then this has to have a style. Contours, you have to create the style for contours. Give you the parameters for that. And that's generally what your drawing should look like. And then again, everything has a color for the line type, which I'm not doing. Plus all of the labels, right? When I want to label this, I click on it. I go to add labels, contour multiple, and I draw a line. Again, draw polylines perpendicular to the contours as best you can. Right? Follow the lie of the land. Don't just draw a line. Right? Don't just, this is what I don't want to see. Right? Multiple. Don't just draw a line through the whole site. Okay? That's not going to give you the presentation you want. You have to make sure you kind of follow the lie of the land. Right? And you want to label areas, bound by the water courses. Right? So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 areas that are kind of bound by the water courses. Okay, and then this again has to have the line off. I don't want to see the polyline, so if you go to change properties, you turn the display of the contour label line to false, and then the line disappears. But if you want to make a change, if you click on one of them, you get this temporary blue version. You can always change the position of it, tweak it. Okay. And if you label, a steep area, everything's going to be on top of each other. You can't read anything. In this particular case, if it's steep, it's tight density, turn off the line always, and then turn off the visibility of the minor contours. Only label the major contours. And that'll give you a little more space. And if they're still kind of crowded, in this case, I'll make an exception. Instead of going perpendicular, I'll go on a slight angle. That'll spread them out. It'll be a little easier to read. And these are just artistic kind of presentation techniques that I'm giving you tips about. Okay, Dee, does that help? Mr. Glenn? Yeah, there might be a mistake there. Let me just check that. So the PDF you're talking about. Oops. So on number 5, you're talking about the group names. Yeah, the group names are T dash. I'm calling them D dash. D dash. Yeah. Pick only the groups that have. Pick everything except all points. Okay. Again, this is a guide. This was a few years old, and I've modified the course since then, but there's still good reference documents. Okay. I recreate groundwork and the program remains nuts. I'd have to see your drawing, Michael. Do you want to email it to me? Or hang on. I've got a little bit of time after this class if you want to meet and you can share your screen with me. Either that or send me your DWG and I'll look at just this one issue. Okay, any other questions? Okay, so again, the deadline is Friday before midnight. I want to mark them on the weekend and give me some feedback as to what you've done and what you have to. This surface is required for everything else we do going forward. Okay? Your existing ground profile depends on it, your grading design depends on it, your earthworks calculation depends on it. So you have to make sure this surface is modeled correctly. Okay? So I will give you feedback. If there's anything in the surface that is not correct, you'll have to fix it after this assignment's done. Anything related to presentation, or you forgot to turn the layer off, or there's something missing in the title block, you don't have to go back and fix that. You can, and maybe you should when you're not under some time pressure, if you want to use it as a portfolio drawing, if you want to take it to an interview or show it during the interview, if you're doing Zoom interviews this year. But it won't be necessary going forward. So I'm going to tell you when I mark it, okay, this is your grade, but these things you must fix, absolutely must be correct before you go on. If you lose a mark for it, you don't need to fix it going forward. Okay, so I will kind of try and streamline, anything you have to redo. That way, we don't waste time. Okay, so just keep that in mind going forward. Okay, I encourage you to fix everything, but certainly I'll point out what absolutely has to be correct going forward, because it will have an impact on the results you're expecting later. Okay? Any other questions? Feel free to use your microphone. You can unmute yourself. I'm allowing that. I thought there'd be a lot of noise, but nobody wants to talk. I don't know why.
Hi, sir.
Hello, who's this?
This is Caitlin.
Oh, Caitlin, yes.
I just have a question. So,
Yeah.
for isolating the T layers, or in our case, the G layers, do we just turn
No.
off?
So you're talking about isolating the lines you want to use as break lines?
Yeah.
Okay, so those are T dash layers.
Yes. That's what
Okay.
I meant.
So to isolate them, this is how I do it. I go to my layer control, then LA for layer control. I bring this dialog box up. I control A, select everything, and then touch the light bulbs, turn everything off. And then they should be in alphabetical order. I go to all the T dash layers, right? I pick the first one, and then I pick the last one. So those are all the T dash layers. The only ones I want on are the ones that are not sand, storm, and water. So I want to deselect the sand, I don't want that. Sand, I don't want that one. Storm, I don't want that one. And water main, I don't want those. Everything else should be a break line. So when you turn those on, that's all you should see. And it looks like this. Right? Edge of pavement, center line, edges of pavement, shoulders, embankment layer. That's it. These are the break lines. Caitlin, does that help?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
So now when that's the only thing on, you can select them all. Now, and the other one is the water course, which I didn't draw, right? So I didn't draw those, but you need to draw those for your assignment. Remember, connect the dots of the water course layer. If you don't remember that, let me show you quickly. There are points, go to my layer control, on my layer called P dash water course. Remember this? And if you don't see the points, reach in. It's just the video card. Remember, you got to connect these dots. This one here, all these points here is a single line, right? And all of the other ones is a double line. If you have a hard time looking at that, you can go to your G dash water course group and turn off temporarily. So if this was my group for the water course, which it's not, but if it was, I can go to the properties and temporarily change the style to none. So that way you just see the dots. Now you can connect the dots easily. When you're done, you turn them back on. And then assign the proper style again, whatever that needs to be. And it's just easier to work without the labels in your face, right? Then turn your O snaps to node and just take the time to connect all the dots. For the polylines that are being drawn for water main, does it matter how many polylines we have? For not water main, water course, Michael. Do you mean the water course, the stuff I'm showing? Okay. For the polylines that were being drawn for the water, does it matter how many polylines we have? No, it doesn't. No, if you stop and start, that's fine. It really doesn't matter. But they have to be polylines. Okay, so I can do this if I want, right? I can draw a polyline connect the dot from up to my OSNAP node, polyline, and then just connect the dots. That layer's off, sorry. So I want to be in a layer called T watercourse. And then I draw, oops, not the point. I want the current layer to be T watercourse. So when I'm connecting the dots, I can go from here to here to here to here to here, get distracted, come back, start again. Doesn't matter how many. As long as both, and so on, right? If this is a polyline and this is a polyline, you're good to go. It doesn't have to be continuous. So if you get stuck or you stop in the middle for whatever reason, you don't have to go back and start. Any other questions? So you can still reach me by email before Friday. What I might do, and I've done in the past, if like Michael's having some issues we can't resolve right now. What I'll do is probably, if I can't solve it just with some quick emails back and forth, what I might do is allow, maybe I'll invite you into a Teams meeting where we could exchange dialogue. We'll have a private meeting. We can both talk, we can share screens and so on. So I've done that in the past. And I apologize, I haven't set my office hours yet. I find I'm using up all my time to meet with students all the time. So I have to email at a certain time when you can get a hold of me and when I'm available to have discussions. So I'll try and post that by the end of this week. What I like to do is usually a period or two, after or before our class, if most students are available. Okay, any other questions? I don't know if I can get you to share screens. Let me see. Let's try this, Michael. I'll try it once, see how it works. Let me stop sharing here. This is an experiment for me too. Yeah, you should be able to now share your, might be able to share your screen. Michael, you want to try sharing your screen? Are you, what you look like there? If you want, I don't know if you're comfortable. Try sharing video. If you're okay with that. Oh, you emailed it to me. Okay, let me try this. Save the file. I did allow it, so you might be able to, at the bottom of your screen, you might see your microphone, and next to it, it looks like a video camera box with a funnel sticking out of it. Otherwise, I'll just open your drawing here. Let me see. Michael, is it okay if I open your drawing in class? Everyone will see it. Are you okay with that? Okay, so let me do that. Shut mine down. Save and close this. I'm going to open your download. So there's the file you sent me, Michael. Alright, let's see if I can figure this out. So now you're testing me. Let me see if I can do this. Caitlin, if you touch one of the polylines, are they all selected? Do they all highlight? If you click on one, do they all highlight? Just the one you're trying to touch. this one, right? Michael, you want to turn your microphone on? Walk me through this. Okay, so this is the one that's causing you problems. Is that correct?
But we can't see your screen right now.
Oh, shoot. Sorry. Hang on. Try that again. Okay, so this is your drawing. There you go. Okay, so Michael, this is your drawing.
Yeah.
So the G dash ground is the problem, right?
Well, it's one of them.
Okay, so if we go to properties, what I include. Okay, so that's good. And there's points in there called ground. That's good, okay. And you don't see them on screen. That's the problem, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's nothing off. And there's nothing off. Okay, that's good. Okay, so here's what we have to do. Under in ground, I'm going to check your properties, and we're looking at the styles, points and E. See that? So now I'm going to go explore those styles. So I'm going to go to settings. I'm going to go to point styles. It's called points, right? Edit. These are off. That's why. The visibility state for the point style called points, the visibility state is off. See that?
Yeah.
Show it to you again. Let me show it. Yeah, so if you go to point, so again, start right from scratch. Go to tool space, go to settings, go to the points, go to the point styles, go to the one called points, right click, edit. And if you go to the display tab, you'll see both of these light bulbs are off. Turn them on. And you say okay. If you regen, everything should appear. And then that might be true. That might be, oh, there you go. So it's off. That's your problem. So you see, so you turned something off that I didn't tell you to turn off.
Yeah.
We were lucky to be able to find that.
Yeah,
But
we'll find it.
it's always a mystery to be solved sometimes. So if you make a change that I didn't tell you to make, like then it takes this kind of forensics, right? And then I'm just drawing on my experience. Why don't you see it? Well, there's so many reasons why you might not see something. Maybe the layer is off. Oh, it's on. Well, is it frozen? That's another visibility state. Then you have these visibility states, true, false, as well, right? So there's, if there's 10 settings for visibility and one of them is telling you not to see it, you have to know where to find all those settings. And there are many more than just on, off, restart. It's getting much more complicated, unfortunately. The other way it gets screwed up too is if I just pick one and I say change, these are all the things that could happen, and there's many others. If I just pick one and I change from default to something that's got no display, if I hard code this and it always looks like a hydrant and it always looks like a description, well, why does my tree look a hydrant? Why does it look like that when it's supposed to be a tree? Well, because you hard coded the style. If you don't leave that as default, and again, a better word than default would be by group, then it won't react based on the group membership. It'll react based on hard coding. It's like making the color of a line red instead of bilayer. That's another issue. And I could sit here forever talking about what could happen. So we got to be careful. There's so many what could happen. And then if I can't solve it, then I gotta go talk to someone who's a bigger expert than me. Say, hey, this is my issue. What's going on? Anyway, so that's the problem. You had your visibility state. And if there was others, right, you might check all of yours, edit the point, make sure in the display tab everything is visible.
Okay.
So that was your issue, unfortunately. So that was unique. I haven't seen that one before. I know how to solve that, but no student in the past has done that. So you were first. Good for you.
Hey, thank you very much.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Now, again, if you had done all the work up to date before today, you should just be getting your presentation ready, right? Creating your paper space settings, all your title block information, get a north arrow, and there's no reason why you can't be done for Friday. Friday's actually, could have been due today, but I always give till the end of the week because we're going digital, right? There used to be a time where I would accept hard copies of the PDFs. That stopped a long time ago. noticed with four plotters up in building A on a day where assignments were due, people were getting frustrated with each other, and I wanted to prevent a fist fight, so I stopped accepting hard copies. So the PDF is really how I'm going to mark your assignments, as well as the drawing. There's certain things in the PDF that I can't see. I have to go into the drawing, right? So not everything that's happening in the drawing is going to be apparent on the PDF, right? So I have the same problem with Caitlin. Could you talk about it more? What was Caitlin's problem? The break?
Hi, sir.
Yeah. Who's that?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's you, Olivia.
Okay. So let me just show you here. And if you've got everything. Did you insert your break lines in here? Michael, I don't think you did that yet. Gotta go back to my file. When you insert the file, did you explode it? Caitlin? This is the only thing I can think of. So if you insert the file, if you go to touch one of your break lines and only one gets highlighted, that's good. Right? But if you touch it and they all get highlighted, then the file you inserted has not been exploded. Okay, so if you touch one, Caitlin, turn your microphone on. It'll be faster than typing. If you don't mind.
Okay. Yeah, it's on.
Yeah. So if you touch one of the lines, does the whole set highlight or just the one?
The whole set, so I didn't break it.
Okay. Yeah. So you need to type in X for explode, and then hit it, and then but don't explode again. These have to remain polylines. If you explode the polylines, then you won't be able to define them as break lines. So part of the insert command, see here? See this insert command? I want everything off. You could turn this one on and actually explode it on the fly while you insert it. That's what I didn't do. So if it comes in and you didn't explode it during the insert command, you'll have to manually explode it. And then you can select them. They have to be individual polylines like I'm showing on screen right now.
Okay. Okay, yeah, it works. Thank you.
All right, perfect. Okay. Nobody wants to speak. Okay. Oh well, I think going forward, I'll leave the audio on then. I'll let you be able to turn your microphone off of mute and talk if you want. I know. Okay, so if there's no other questions, I'm gonna leave it at that. Again, I've been recording all this time. I guess I didn't need to be, but I'm gonna stop the recording. That'll be available probably later today or tomorrow for sure, so you can review all this. And that's it. So it's due on Friday before midnight. I'll have them marked on the weekend, and I will post your results. I'm trying to figure out a way. I used to hand out hard copies of your results. So I've got kind of a marking rubric that I use. I used to hand out hard copies. I'm trying to figure out how to email it. But I don't want to send 40 emails. I want to send them en masse. So I'm trying to figure out how to do that. So that's my intent. So the final grade will be posted online, but the details of the assignment breakdown grades will probably be an email submission. I'll send everybody a personal individual email. Just got to figure out how to do that en masse, but that's my problem. Okay, if there's no other questions, I'm going to stop there. And if something comes up between now and Friday, drop me an email. And if it's something complicated, I'll find a way of connecting with you through some kind of video chat. Again, please do not send me your drawing and say check it. It's not going to happen, right? But just like today, Michael had a specific problem that I was able to troubleshoot. Okay, but I didn't check the rest of his file. Like I'm not going to do that. You have to have a specific issue that you want to discuss. Okay, that's how I'm going to assist and support you when you're doing your assignments. Okay, so there's no point in grading it ahead of time. Okay, so you have to really navigate through this yourself, right? Based on what I've taught you, what I've posted, you can go back and review the videos. There's lots of resources now. You should be able to do this first assignment. Okay? Everything you need to know to complete this assignment has been provided now, plus a few other things. When I answer specific questions for other students, I'm sure that's helpful for everybody. Okay, so if there's nothing else, I'm going to sign off and have a good rest of the week. thanks everybody for coming. And if you know anybody who's not been attending, like the group kind of wasn't full today, if you know anybody that hasn't been coming to class, maybe you want to tell them that they can come to class and ask questions. I think it's important. It's faster for me to help if you're here. And I can answer your questions on the fly. Okay, thank you everybody. Take care.